Committee of Wednesday, the 8th of February. If we can take the first agenda item, which is apologies for absence, please.
Apologies from councillors Mike Lewis, Kelly Roberts, Rob Stewart, Andrea Lewis and David Hopkins.
Okay, I don't think we need the apologies from the leader of the council. Thank you. If we could take the next item on the agenda, any disclosures of interest, please. Personal or prejudicial. I've seen a hands up to Councillor Leslie Bolton.
Yeah, that was the wrong hand, but yeah, item 4, I'm Governor of Dylan Thomas Community School.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. No further declarations. Okay. If we could move on to agenda item 3, the 11th of January, this meeting was chaired on my behalf by Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams, but if we can take it through the page by page for accuracy and with an acknowledgement if there are any questions of accuracy. Page 1, page 2, page 3 and page 4. If you can have some hands up if that's an accurate reflection of that meeting, please. Got 3 hands up in the room and I've got some hands up on the screen. Okay, thank you very much. Is it an accurate reflection of that meeting? If we can move on to the next agenda item, which is internal audit monitoring report, Q3 for 2022-23. And if I can invite the Chief Auditor, Simon Cockins, to take us through this report, please.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Q3 monitoring report for internal audit, which summarises the work completed by the team between October and December 22. As shown in section 2, 10 audits were completed in the quarter, 3 with a high level of assurance and 7 with a substantial level of assurance. 80 audit recommendations were made and client departments agreed to accept all of those recommendations, and the split of those recommendations is in 2.4. So there were 9 medium risk, 65 low risk and 6 good practice recommendations as shown in the table. Appendix 3 of the report is the position of the annual plan for the team as at the 31st December, the end of the quarter, and a summary of the statistics are in 2.8, which shows as at the end of December, 41 audits were completed to at least draft report stage, which shows about 32% of the plan. An additional 30 activities were in progress at that time. So as at the end of December, approximately 55% of the plan have been completed or was in progress. Staff sickness, unfortunately, continued to be high in the quarter due to 2 members of staff being off. A total of 61 days sickness was noted up until December, and with a cumulative of 180 days to that date. 1 member of staff has returned back from sick leave, but we still have 1 who's currently still off long-term sick, unfortunately. We also had 2 vacancy positions, which impacted Q3. Obviously, we filled those positions in November, and staff have been recruited and undergoing training at the moment. But unfortunately, due to those vacancies, another 272 days were lost in the year due to vacancy not being filled. As in 2.12, then 452 days in total have been lost from the plan. That has impacted on our delivery. Obviously, unfortunately, we've had to look at the plan for the current year. I'm in the process of putting the draft plan together for 23-24. So a number of the jobs that are on the current year plan that haven't been allocated are being carried forward to next year, and that process is ongoing at the moment. I'm planning to bring a report to CMT towards the end of February, and then the draft report will come to the draft plan, will come to committee in the March meeting for review, as it normally does. Just to point out as well, we have prioritised the fundamental audits and the top tier reviews as a priority. I think we mentioned that in the previous report. An update on the fundamentals is in 2.13. It says there at the end of December, all but 1 of the fundamentals had been started. That has now been started. So the NNDR business rates review is underway. Cash was more or less complete as of the end of December. So I'm fairly confident that all of the fundamentals will be complete by the 31st of March. And similarly for the Tier 1 reviews, the team is working as hard as they can to complete the rest of the plan as far as possible, but it will impact on the completion for the end of the year. Also to note in this quarterly report, only 10 reviews were completed, primarily because a lot of the time was spent on fundamental systems. Those are larger audits and take longer to complete, so that is why more time has been taken in the quarter to complete those. Also note in 2.14, as previously referenced, 2 audits have been deferred from the current plan to next year's. Those are the Achieving Better Together Transformation Review and also Oracle Fusion, and there's a brief explanation there as to why those have been deferred. The chair is already aware of those deferrals and has agreed with Ness that they can be deferred. No moderate audit reports were issued in the quarter. And one follow-up was completed of a moderate report. In 4.3, you can see we completed the follow-up of the FOI, SAR and EAR audit, which was issued in March 2022 with a moderate rating. The outcome of that follow-up showed that 9 of the 13 recs had been completed, but 3 medium risks hadn't been. So we've penciled in a further follow-up for that review in quarter 4. So that's the budget report, Chair. The appendices are basically the reports that are issued in fast final. Appendix 2 is a summary of the scope and key findings. And then Appendix 3 is the plan, as I mentioned. The NNDR one is shown as allocated on there, but it has been started mid-January. So I've got no concerns over the fundamentals. I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you, Simon. Councillor Mike White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, in regards to the summary scope of audits finalised, I noticed regarding education planning resources, we've audited primary school areas, and we've still got some schools that are not complying with the actual 10,000 ruling. I presume we obviously put this in as a recommendation under a procurement scrutiny exercise which we carried out for over a year. And I was on the understanding that head teachers were called to a training session to advise them about what the processes are regarding procurement. So just if we can perhaps look in that area, see if we can get that tightened up if possible.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor White. This is, a recurrent area that we see in committee a number of times for the primary schools. This has been fed back to the primaries in terms of the outcomes of this thematic review. I am aware that I believe procurement is still in the process of finalising the procurement guide for schools. So I believe, Councillor White, there is a proposal to enhance the training in this area from education going forward as well. This will be reported as well as part of our education schools annual report, which again gets fed back to education and to the schools. So this is something we are constantly looking at, really, Councillor White. But as members are aware, this is a recurring theme with the primaries, unfortunately. But it is looking a bit better than it used to be, I say, Mike. But there are still improvements to be made, and it is on education's radar to address.
Okay,
Is that
thank
okay,
you.
Mike?
Yes, thank you, Simon. Thank you. As long as it's been monitored, that's the main thing.
Okay, Julie Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Simon, thank you for the report. I think we all appreciate the hard work that has been done, especially with the difficult circumstances that you're operating under at the moment. I would like you to take you to page 8, paragraph 214, and your decision to defer the cross-cutting review, Achieving Better Together. I would like to have assurance over savings delivery and the impact on the council budget. So is it possible, rather than deferring the review, to consider changing the scope so that you look at that risk?
Thanks, Julia. Thanks for recognising the difficult situation we're in with vacancies and absences, etc. 2.14 of the report does give a brief explanation as to why the ABT transformation review has been deferred. This looks at workforce strategy and savings delivery, and my discussions with Ness Young I've indicated that that's part of phase 3 of the programme, which at the time of compiling the report hadn't actually been started. I'm not sure. I think Ness is obviously in this meeting. I wonder if Ness maybe can give a brief update on that to the members. Would that be okay?
Ness,
Yeah,
do you want to come in?
Sure. So in terms of, it depends what the committee wants to look at, but if you're looking at what has happened up to this point, then, you know, if an audit can be undertaken in the time, then that's fine. But if you're looking in terms of the transformation element of Achieving Better Together, that was always designed to be in part 3, and part 3 is what we're working on developing at the moment. So it fundamentally, it depends on what the Governance and Audit Committee is looking for from that audit. If you're looking specifically at phases 1 and 2 of Achieving Better Together, which concluded in May 2022, then an audit would be appropriate at this point. So I think my question back to the committee would be, what specifically are you wanting the audit to cover?
If I could just come back on
Perhaps
that,
I could
really.
ask a question on, in terms of savings delivery, is there any delay in the savings from phases 1 and 2, or is the council budget, you know, is Ben Smith up to speed on where the savings should be, and are they at target?
Can I come in there? I think Ben is not in the meeting today because he's got priorities in covering for the chief exec today. So with regards to the savings, I think it's proper for that to be asked of Ben opposed to Ness. But if I could also add that in discussion I had with Ness, it seemed to me that we needed to be assured that the transformation element was on track, and the sort of the resource pressures on Simon's team, it would be more appropriate for us to look at the transformation achievements as they're moving forward, rather than look back retrospectively, because there's changes afoot with transformation, and it seemed to be reasonable to look at that at it as it's moving through the paces. So that was the reason why I supported Ness's request to defer that in recognition of what Simon has said.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Simon and Non.
Gordon Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if I can take you to page 13, Simon. I'm surprised that a fire and safety audit hasn't been done for the last 3 years in a children's, I don't know whether it's a residential or an outdoor centre, but it does seem to be a breakdown in the system somewhere.
Yeah, I can give you some feedback on that, Gordon. If you can imagine what sort of scenarios these centres are, they are residential and outdoor centres. As you can imagine, over the period of COVID, those centres were primarily closed for an extended period of time. So throughout from 2020 onwards, essentially, those establishments weren't operating. They hadn't had any visits. There were no staff there. They essentially were on closure and shutdown. So that is primarily the reason that the safety inspections hadn't been completed. They are being addressed at this point in time as things are opening back up and people are starting to revisit. But that's the rationale and the reasons behind those not being completed, primarily because the sites were closed over that period.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Phil Sharman.
Thank you, Chair. Simon, if I could just go into a bit further depth on the resource issues that you're facing. As I understand it, you've got two things. You've got vacancies and you've got sickness. And paragraph 212 indicates that that's a total of 452 days, which you didn't have available to you, but you had planned to have. Simon, when I look back at our April meeting, I could see that the plan for the year had 1,506 days. So if you take 450, that's about 1/3 of the plan, which arguably is impacted by these resource gaps. So when I then went to the appendix, I could only see 4 audits that are deferred. And when I add up those 4 audits, it's just 35 days of savings. So Simon, it'd be really helpful, I think, if you could just outline whether there's going to be a more dramatic impact of this resource shortage on your plan for the year, and also whether there's going to be an impact then on your opinion at the year end, because as a committee, we would be concerned, quite rightly, if you were unable to deliver pretty much a third of the plan because of the impact that might have. And I think we'd be much more inclined, if you were having a really big problem here, to support a call for additional resource. And I know you kind of discounted that in 211, but if you needed it, then we'd certainly be prepared. Well, I'm sure members would be eager to look at other options to allow you to achieve or have a sufficient base to give an opinion at the year end that was, from your point of view, a professional, credible opinion based on the work that you've done for the year. So I guess that's the worry that we have.
Yeah.
And if you could expand on that, it'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Well, thanks for the question. First of all, the vacancies were up until November, so those two positions were actually filled in November. So staff have filled those posts from November onwards. Obviously, there is some lead-in time for the training, etc., for them to settle in and get up to speed with the work. So that's a work in progress, shall we say. We have got full staff now in post, except for the sickness. There was one person off sick. In terms of the number of days on the plan, you are right in terms of the number of days allocated to audit, but the total days of resource across the whole team, which includes annual leave, expected sick leave, training, any appraisals, anything that's not allocated to a particular job, shall we say, on the plan, that sort of equates to about 2,300 days in total of resource, which includes all those non-productive items. So in terms of the 452 is off the 2,300 total days. So it's not just off the active days, if that makes sense, Phil. Is that a suitable explanation for that area? And then in terms of
so just on that then, Simon, so what you're really saying is you've still lost 400 days against 2,300. So that's still around about a fifth of your effort that's been lost in the year, yeah?
Yeah, it is. It isn't the best case scenario, as I've mentioned before. It is quite a big chunk to lose. We have prioritised, the key tier 1, tier 2 reviews at this point, and the team are working as hard as they can to complete the rest. At this point, we are, as of yesterday, the plan statistics, we had 54 audits completed at final stage, sorry. We had one out as draft and 27 audits were in progress. So as of yesterday, this is a further update from December, we're looking at around about 42% of the plan complete, with an additional 21 underway. So we're looking at around about 65% at this point, hopefully by year end. So it is something I'm constantly monitoring. Obviously, in terms of bringing in external resource, there's also a lead-in time for that to source, to train, and to bring them in up to speed with the team. So at that point, at the end of Q3, and at this point in time, I don't know how beneficial that would be in terms of the impact on this year's plan. We'll have to see where we are at come year end in terms of the impact on any opinion. But at this point, I'm fairly confident we could reach the 65-70% mark of completion at year end, Phil.
Okay, Chair, thank you. Simon, no, that's understood. And I think it would be helpful then if you were able to identify those audits that I might put at risk. So I know you've marked the 4 as being deferred in this one, but perhaps when we come to the next meeting, you could have a look through and any which are more likely to be rolled into next year, deferred.
Absolutely.
That would be useful to know, just so we could take a view as to whether that's sufficient. But, if you're saying pretty much 65% of the plan or more would be complete and you can still form a judgment on that, that's good.
Yeah.
But if there were any risk areas, then we could perhaps help you prioritise, I guess.
Of course, Phil. Just to let you know, that's the exercise I'm actually currently doing at the moment. We've gone through the annual consultation exercise with heads of service to inform the 23-24 annual plan. I've been through that consultation result and I'm currently looking at next year's plan and including those deferred audits. So the draft report for that that plan for next year is due to go to CMT towards the end of this month to make them aware of deferrals, and that report is also then due to come to the March meeting to yourselves for review, to look at the draft plan for next year and what's actually being deferred. So that is the work I'm currently working on at the moment, Phil.
Thank you, Simon. Can I just pick up on follow up on some of the points that Phil has raised? Within your appendix, you categorise the status of the work as final, which is understood, in progress, which is understood, planned, understood. What do you mean by allocated?
Okay, the allocated are jobs that are being allocated to the team as part of Nick's quarterly allocation spreadsheet. So ones that are allocated have been given out to staff to try and arrange to make a start on those reviews. So those have been allocated to the team in the quarterly listings for them to start planning to start. So the planned ones haven't been allocated. So the majority of the planned ones on the plan, Paula, have been deferred. That's the exercise I'm doing at the moment. So those that are planned haven't been given out to the auditors to make a start on and have been deferred now to next year. The allocated, I'm in the progress of going through those with Nick at the minute. I'm closer towards the end of the year to see which of those have not been able to make a start, and then will also probably need to be deferred as well.
Okay, that's helpful. I understand that better now.
Okay.
If I could then ask for you to consider, I don't necessarily want you to comment this afternoon, but I'm looking at the drive to complete fundamental audits, recognising they're all pretty positive in previous years. I'm just wondering whether you need to consider the approach that you take with regards to sample size, etc., to see if there's any efficiency savings that could be made, recognising the positive outcomes you've had previously in that area of work, to make room for other high risk areas that you may currently be looking to defer. If I could ask you to consider that. I don't expect you to comment, but it's just if you could consider it. And the other area I picked up is regards to 4.3, where you've got 3 medium risks and 1 low risk that remain outstanding, with your intention to revisit that in Q4. Recognising your pressures, I just wonder, does that need to be revisited in Q4, or is there another source in which management can give you assurance that that work's been complete? Again, I don't expect you to comment, but if you can take those two comments away for me to consider further, to see if that will give you any more wriggle room to do more and defer less.
Yes, thanks, Jamie. I'll take those comments on board and go back and think about these. In terms of the follow-up of the recommendations, historically, we haven't been content to let medium risk recommendations go and followed up for a second time, basically. But yeah, I agree, given the pressures we're under, that could push to Q1 next year, or, we could ask for further assurance on that. In terms of the sample sizes for the fundamentals, I agree. Some of them have, unfortunately, dropped back down to an annual cycle. So while they have been positive, there has been a slight weakness in some of the areas. So I would be reluctant to possibly reduce the sample size too much in some of them. But yeah, I agree for some of the others that are, quite high assurance or done on a 2-yearly cycle where there are very little issues. I agree with that approach, Chair.
I just think, with past experience that I've had when the pressure's been on, it really forces you to look at other ways of gaining assurance through smarter way of approach of the audit. Historical working doesn't always fit when you're in that pressure position, but I'm happy to discuss that further with you outside of the meeting.
Yes,
Councillor Leslie Walton.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to add my thanks to Simon and his team for doing as much as they have done during the year, considering the circumstances that they're working under.
Thank you, Councillor Walton, and I would agree with that as well.
Thanks,
if there are no more questions on that paper, can I take you?
Gordon, Chair.
Sorry?
There's a question from Gordon, Chair.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was a legacy hand. Gordon?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Simon, not so much nitpicking, but on your page 17, you allocate 10 days to look at the remuneration of head teachers, which could be over and above the range which is generally accepted. Now, my understanding was the school governors have the authority to pay whatever they wish. And I'm just wondering, what is the purpose of that particular, if there's no sanction at the end of it, is it just an information session, or can we do more?
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. This, just to give you some background to this particular audit, this came through as part of last year's consultation exercise with heads of service and CMT. This is this is a desktop exercise basically where our team have been looking at, we have access to the payroll records obviously of schools and teachers. So this is a request that came from the Director of Education to just do a snapshot of anything that looked slightly unusual or other than whether remuneration was above school range. We were then going to feed that back to the Director of Education as for information for them to possibly take whatever action they saw fit. So that's why it's 10 days. It's kind of a desktop exercise which we can access the data remotely and just do a desktop review really to feed that back to the Director for her information.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Mike White.
Yeah, can I just throw a bit of light on that? Yeah, the process is the head teacher are within a scale under the individual school range, the ISR, and every year the head teacher have got to carry out a performance management task or tasks put forward by the governing body on improvement and taking the school forward, and they have got to approve that obviously that work has taken place. And if they are satisfied with that work has been done, then that panel of the governing body can make a recommendation to the governing body that extra percentage or half a percentage can be allowed.
Thank you, Councillor White. Are there any further questions? Not seeing any hands that are in the room. Thank you, Simon, for that information. And as others have said, you know, I know the pressure you've been under and the drive that you were endeavouring to make in completing the plan. But if you can take away some of those comments that have been raised today, that would be helpful, I think. If I could ask you to go through agenda item 5 now, which is your follow-up report.
Yes, great, thanks, Chair. Yes, again, another report for myself. It's a standard follow-up report, again, for members to give you an update on the recommendation of follow-up work we've completed in Q3. So this summarises the follow-up work of the high and substantial assurance audit reports. So it's generic follow-up work that we undertake to check recommendation implementations. 4.6 gives a summary of the follow-ups that we've completed, the recommendations, sorry. So of all the recommendations we followed up, 28 medium risk, all but 1 had been implemented. Low risk, 3 hadn't been implemented, and good practice, 2 hadn't been implemented, as shown in the table. The audits that had follow-ups completed are in Appendix 2, and then there's further detail of those recommendations that hadn't been implemented in Appendix 3. So it gives you the audit and the actual detail of the recommendations that hadn't been implemented. As you can see, there's 1 medium risk recommendation not implemented, but action is being taken on that. We followed that up with the Swansea City Bus Station. 2 invoices had been paid, and there's 1 outstanding, which they are currently chasing. So there is action being taken on that one. But yeah, that's the summary, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions on the content of the report.
Not seeing any. Phil?
Thank you, Chair. Simon, on this report, and I know it's something I've raised before, but I am keen to make sure there is a solution coming forward, and that is in respect of paragraph 3.1 on page 27 regarding the tracking of external audit recommendations. Now, I know that sits outside of your remit, but nonetheless part of your report. Members will have seen that on agenda item 11, we've got the tracker for the work of this committee. And item 74 of the tracker says a software solution will be rolled out during 22-23. Well, given we just got 2 months left now until the end of this year, I just wonder what progress or what substantive progress has been made to really get a grip on the audit recommendations raised by Audit Wales, so that as we move into the new year, we've got a better measure of how those are doing. And I do appreciate the work you're doing following up your own audits. That's understood, but it's about trying to get a full picture. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I'm not sure if I'm best person to respond to that, or whether it would be Ness and Richard possibly. I believe the responsible officer in the action tracker was Ness, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not on that page at the moment.
I think it's Richard Rowlands that have been driving this one, Simon. So Richard, do you want to comment on the update?
Yeah, certainly, Chair. I think I gave an update to the last committee meeting. We are working on a software solution that we hope will enable us to track audit recommendations. It's an integrated software solution, so it'll allow us to manage performance as well as risk, and also the tracking actions and recommendations and things like that. So we're working on that now. We're focusing our efforts initially on the performance side and on the risk management side. The actions part will follow later. We had hoped that we would have completed that by the end of this financial year. I think in reality, it's going to take us longer than that. So I can't give the committee an exact date when the work will be done, but we are making progress with it. And as I say, we're actually focusing most of our efforts at the moment on the performance and the risk management elements of the software application.
Thank you, Richard. Do you want to expand on that to advise the committee or to remind the committee again on the actions you are taking with the introduction of that central post box, where you can track the committees that the reports are going to? So if you can just give a little reminder of what's happened there.
Certainly, Chair. As I mentioned at the last meeting, we have established a central inbox. So all of the published studies from Audit Wales go to this central inbox. The inbox has been shared with the chairs of the Scrutiny Programme Committee. The chair of the Audit Committee can't access the inbox because of ICT reasons, but I always ensure that the chair's copied in. Director of Corporate Services has access. Section 151 officer has access. The scrutiny team lead has access. I have access to it. I think Simon has access to it. I'm not sure about that. I have to confirm that. So what it does, it allows visibility in terms of all the audit reports that have been published by Audit Wales. And then we make sure that those reports follow the correct route. And the correct route is that they go through the Scrutiny Committee first, and then come here to the Governance and Audit Committee later. And today you've got an example of that, a report on net zero that went to Scrutiny Committee, I believe in December, is now coming here to the Governance and Audit Committee. And we make sure that's happening with all the relevant and appropriate reports.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate that. Any other questions? Not seen any. Phil, have you got another one? No. Can I just pick up one matter in the appendix 2? Was that, yeah, where you got the housing division and the pest animal control. Within the commentary in that box on the right-hand column, it talks about to be finalised as new starters, as new weapons required. That terminology of weapons means equipment. So not to alarm people that we're not accounting for weapons, but it's actually equipment. So I just want to clarify that for that reason only.
Yeah, just to further clarify on that, Chair, it actually relates to air pistols for the dispersal of rats at this point. So it's not a weapon as in a weapon, it's for pest control more than anything.
I didn't want the public alarmed with anything that wasn't controlled or accounted for. So I wanted to raise that just for clarification. Okay, so if there are no more questions on that paper, thank you again, Simon. I do appreciate that, and look forward to receiving further updates at the next meeting.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Thanks for all your comments.
Okay, if we can move on now then to the agenda item 6, which is the corporate risk overview. And Richard Rowlands, if I can invite you to come in.
Thank you, Chair. So the report provides an overview of corporate risk during the third quarter. You can see in the report in paragraph 2.2 that all the corporate risks were noted as having been reviewed at least once during the quarter, and the changes that did take place during the third quarter can also be seen in the same paragraph. There were quite a few changes to the corporate risk register during quarter 3 as a result of a review by CMT and Cabinet of the corporate risks as set out in paragraph 3 on page 40. This includes 6 new risks that were added to the corporate risk register, 2 risks that were closed, 2 risks that were de-escalated, and 2 risks that had their RAG status changed. And reasons for that is recorded within the register for audit purposes. And you can see a full list of the corporate risks as at the end of quarter 3 in paragraph 3.3 on page 40. We have a snapshot of the corporate risk register as at the end of quarter 3, which is attached at Appendix A on page 43. And we have a guide to the various headings within the report, which we found in paragraph 2.3. And finally, paragraph 4.2 notes that at the last meeting, the committee wanted to see a list of the corporate and the directorate level risks managed through the Social Services Directorate. And so these have been attached at Appendix B, starting on page 68. And just one final point, Chair. On page 58, we have the corporate risk, new corporate risk around the corporate transformation plan. If I can just refer the committee to the 4th control measure for that particular risk, the control measure relating to the Governance and Audit Committee, and that's been amended in recent times to recognise that the report will be to provide assurance, not to seek Governance and Audit Committee input into the new plan, and the date has been shifted to the end of March as the report will be presented at the next committee meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Have we got any questions for Richard on this paper?
Just ask for a point of clarification, Richard. It's the first one actually to do with the pupil attainment. I can see it actually running along each month. There's amber, then there's a gap, and then it goes to red. Why was there a gap, and why did it actually go red at that point?
There was a gap in those particular months with the risk being assessed for its RAG status. So every month we ask that all the risks are reviewed and that the RAG status is reviewed as part of that review. And in those particular months that wasn't actually done. So that's why it's blank in the report. And then you can see that it was done again in December, which is why that is now coloured up.
Sorry, can I just ask, why did it actually go red? What is the reason for that?
That's just an assessment that was undertaken by the director. So that would be an evaluation of the circumstances within the education service at that particular point in time. I don't know the precise reasons for that. You're probably best directing that question to the director, Helen Morgan-Rees.
Can we put that as an action in the tracker then to get clarification as to why that was the case from Helen?
Thank you, Chair. Richard, thank you for your report. Again, I make no apology, Richard, to raise something which I know has come before the committee before, but I'm still eager to make sure there is a way forward. And you allude to it in 3.5, and that is about the residual risk assessment. So I find this report all very interesting, but it doesn't really give me a measure of how effective those mitigating actions are in bringing down a level of risk. So in the previous example, where we're seeing a red risk on, say, educational achievement, doesn't really give us a feel for the work that education are doing in the light of that risk to therefore apply mitigating actions, new strategies to try and improve pupil attainment and therefore lower the risk to an acceptable level for the council. So maybe you could just expand a little bit on 3.5 and where that's reached. And also in doing so, Richard, how managers are managing to manage their risks without any information around the residual risk and the mitigating actions, if that's currently absent.
Sure. So this is a work in progress for us. The work has been undertaken on the current risk register. So ICT have been working on that, and they're very close now to completing the work. So we're expecting to have the system presented to us within the next week or so for us to test. And then once we've done that, then we can roll it out to all the risk owners. In the meantime, what we have done is that we've done some work around the new corporate risks in terms of identifying inherent and residual risk. So that learning that we've had from that process, we can apply when we then apply it to the remaining corporate risks, which as I say, I hope we're able to do once we've received that work back from the ICT department and we're able to test the system and then roll it out to all the risk owners.
Thank you, Richard. Have we got any other questions? I've got a couple of comments, Richard, on the report. The first one regards to the 6 new risks. Obviously, you know, it's good that you've identified these 6 new risks, but obviously that is quite an alarming status, really, to see those risks emerging at the pace that they are. And I'm pleased to just hear you saying that you're looking at those to look at what the mitigation factors are to reduce and manage those risks. So we really look forward to seeing that. And I think it's quite important that some traction is given to that so we can be assured. With regards to the matter you raised around the corporate transformation plan, risk on the page and the reference to the Governance and Audit Committee, thank you for editing that, because I was concerned when I read it because I didn't think that was the remit of this committee. And the cost of living crisis risk on a page I would raise. You talk about providing individuals with help and advice regarding homelessness issues, housing benefit and rent arrears. My question to you is, how are you going to achieve that?
Again, sorry, Chair, but I think that's probably a question that's best directed towards the risk owner for this particular risk.
Do you want to come in on that, Ness?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the service area will have more detail, but the housing options team provides advice to anybody who is homeless or at risk of homelessness. And the officers from rent teams work with our tenants on helping them with any advice on access to benefits, etc. So there's a range of services that we have in place across the council. We work with statutory and voluntary sector partners to do everything that we can to support people to ensure they have the advice and support they need in relation to debt advice, housing advice, etc. But as Richard says, you know, the service area will be able to provide more detailed response.
Thank you, Ness. I was just looking to see if there was any public communications and awareness campaigns going to take place within the comms team. I suppose that's what I was looking for. And maybe we can ask for an update with regards to that from, is it the responsible officer or is it the lead councillor? I take advice on which is appropriate. Councillor Leslie Wharton.
Yes, from the last few comments and questions, I would argue that, as Richard's pointed out, a lot of the detail is not his remit, but it's the remit of the relevant department. Now, if we've got queries, then could I suggest that perhaps we decide who we want to invite and ask them to come to another meeting so we can make sure that we're talking to the right people? Thank you.
I would agree with that, Councillor Walton. And perhaps we can put that in the action tracker. So we can pick that up. Councillor Mike White.
Yeah, just to endorse for my colleague who said, Councillor Walton, clearly the staff within housing, because of the current situation, everybody is facing with the cost of living and things like that. Our officers, as I say, are working round the clock to get this support out to those people that are in need of help, and I know that they are engaging with appropriate stakeholders. So it's important that these people that are in need and desperate need of support get the support they can off the council as soon as possible. And as I say, ensure if the cabinet member for housing or one of the lead officers in housing, I'm sure they'd be, or the benefits team, I'm sure they'd be able to back up what Councillor Walton and I are saying. It's important that these people are given support ASAP, Chair.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I was just looking for something on a wider scale for those that are not in that system of accessing housing or benefits, etc. But I'm happy to take that away and to clarify that. I've got Mark Wade's hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just as a responsible director for all things at place, but in particular housing, more than happy to arrange for officers to provide some information, either in a written report or attending to give some detail. It is a very broad subject, however, and may take up a little more time than you may have in a regular meeting, is what I would say, particularly if we wanted to take it outside of the housing environment. But very important topic, and happy to arrange that as the committee may require. Okay,
thank you. If there are no more questions on that report, then thank you, Richard. I know the effort that you're putting in to enhance this report and to provide the information that we're after, and also what the information that the council itself needs to have to be able to manage the risks that it's facing at the moment. So thank you so much, Richard, for that effort.
Thank you, Chair.
If we could move forward then on to agenda item 7, and that's the Place Directorate Internal Control Environment. Mark Wade.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Chair. I'm Mark Wade. I'm the Interim Director of Place. Currently, I'm just going to take you through the report that you will no doubt have had a chance to study. By way of background, then, in terms of internal control environment within Place, then for risk management and other areas around effective uses of resources. Place itself, I'm sure you'd be more than familiar, is the the operational frontline face of the authority, dealing with such direct services as highways, transport, building services, our property team, waste, parks and cleansing, housing, what we've just mentioned, and also planning and city regeneration, along with cultural services. So a broad range of services there, and hence a broad range of risks being managed as well. Prompt identification and processes are in place to manage risk within appropriate levels then, and that's detailed in section 2 of the report as part of our service review and planning cycle process. I'll make frequent reference to PFM, our Performance and Finance Management meetings, and our DMT, our Directorate Management Team meetings as well, which is a key part of our internal control and governance structure for a range of issues related to internal control. Particular focus on red risks as referenced there, and using the online system, which is a particularly effective tool for us in terms of monitoring, recording and updating the risks that we are dealing with on a daily basis. Section 2.3 makes the important reference to cabinet members being regularly briefed on such matters via their regular one-to-ones with heads of service and myself as director. And also the robustness of continuity plans, which has been really very much tested to destruction in recent years, which for reasons that you'll be more than familiar with. In terms of moving through the actual, I suppose, the performance management side of things in section 3 and our planning and decision-making processes, range of service area reports, performance indicators, both locally and nationally, are recorded to monitor key activity of the service area and allow us to compare our performance with other authorities. Service planning I've mentioned in relation to each service area prepares an annual service plan that makes reference to and looks upward towards the corporate plan then around council priorities and policies and how they may be implemented. And the governance structure then makes sure that we've got sound planning and decision-making processes in place. Section 5 details our budget and resources management. The very, very strong focus on budget management now for obvious reasons, supported by our colleagues in Ben Smith's directorate as Section 151 officer and our principal finance partners, working with the heads of service and the senior teams to provide up-to-date information through to our P&FM process, to allow proper budget monitoring and forecasting and corrective actions as required. That also deals with the way that we charge internally for different services, which are recorded as part of that process as well. As I've said, the monthly P&FM process is central to that, and the process there in relation to P&FM is detailed in section 5.5. That will look at performance indicators I've mentioned, our service risks, obviously budget monitoring and such matters as freedom of information then and staff sickness level, reference to use of agency staff, and also our procurement and financial controls as well, and also relevant audit reports as well, which are predominantly measured by monitored by heads of service, depending on whether they are service level audit reports or potentially at CMT level as well, if there are some corporate cross-cutting issues to be monitored through that process. Section 6 touches on fraud and financial impropriety in terms of ensuring proper compliance. Our regular audits conducted via the agreed programme with the Chief Auditor. Annually, each service area is subject to a regular internal audit programme that you'd be more than familiar with, and ensuring that any issues of alleged impropriety are referred through to internal audit and HR accordingly. Compliance with policies, rules and regulatory requirements then. There are frequent reminders which are issued from a central source and through our DMT and onwards into our senior management teams as well with regard to adherence to relevant policies, and also regular reminders are given to managers and team members then directly in relation to any training opportunities and refreshers which are required. Certainly service is subject to regular scrutiny. Again, frontline operational service, lots and lots of high-profile projects underway at any one time, and they would all be subject to the appropriate scrutiny processes. Reference also to corporate delivery committees as well, the CDCs, new in our structure, and place is taking a central role with two of those, the climate change and nature recovery, and also economy and infrastructure CDCs as well. So we have a programme and project assurance process in place via some directorate project managers, again dealing with some of the directorate's priority projects. I'm not going to go through those in detail now because a number you will be familiar with, but cyclically we will be dealing with project managers, and having robust project management processes in place is key really to us in terms of enabling proper delivery, adherence to the policies and procedures that I've referred to, and also sound budget management as well. In terms of internal controls then, section 9, there is scheme of delegations, there are appropriate authorisations in place as well in relation to orders and payments. That clearly sets out officers' authorised levels based on their relative role and potentially their seniority as well. And things like resilience then, as I've said, have been severely tested in recent times, and we've got a proven record of being able to flex and adapt to whatever may come at us as a directorate, and responding to a number of civil contingencies-based issues is something that would be a core place function. Data security then, again, I'm sure you'll be more than familiar with this in section 10. robust reporting requirements are in place. We do manage high levels of personal information, and as such that requires lots of internal controls through our databases. However, data breaches do on occasion happen, and as such, we ensure that there are proper procedures in place to investigate those and report on them and learn any lessons that may come from that. And again, that is monitored through our PNFM process, and our information lead officers will attend our PNFMs to be able to report on any current issues. And again, as I said, the points of learning there. So overall compliance, very good in that respect, given the amount of data that we may handle at any one time. Partnership and collaboration, then lots of high-profile projects. Reference the city deal there again that you'd be familiar with, and projects that sit underneath that. And more recently, then the advent of the Corporate Joint Committee playing a central role on a regional basis, supporting the work of the CJC, particularly in relation to transport planning, development planning, and also then economic development and energy as well. So we're ensuring that Swansea has a strong representation at CJC currently. Section 12 and 13 and 14 of the standard integrated impact assessment, finance and legal implications of which there are none recorded on this particular report, and the appendices then go into the summary of the directorate risks. So hopefully that has been of use to the committee by way of summary, and I would commend the report to you at that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Any questions for Mark, please, on the content of this report? Gordon?
Yes, thank you, Mark. Mark, on the corporate risk register, page 67, risk 338, you are down as the responsible officer, obviously. In the descriptor at the top of the risk, it says that there is a possibility that net zero will not be met. And again, in the current control measures, it repeats that. Why, therefore, is the historical likelihood low? Is it low that we won't achieve it, or low that we will achieve
it? Thank you for the question. I would suggest that it is low because we're at an early stage at this point in relation to our journey on net zero. And I think that there is reference later on the agenda to that specific topic as well. So from my point of view, it's early days in relation to our, I suppose, management of this issue. We're looking outwards at the moment around funding strategies and the like. So that one will be very much a risk that we'll be monitoring very, very carefully. But I'm certainly happy to take that comment on board and have a look at it. So thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Julie Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Sorry, Mark. Thank you for the report. Could I take you to paragraph 2.1 on page 86? A number of cross-cutting projects are mentioned in the report, and those are most welcome. But I was wondering whether there's a similar cross-cutting approach to the management of all risks, as some risks, if managed in isolation, could combine to have a substantial impact on frontline services. For example, the lack of technical staff resources can impact on the inadequate supply of affordable housing, and cost of living crisis could put pressure on the availability of temporary accommodation. So perhaps you could expand a bit more on how risks are managed. And apologies for my voice.
Not at all. Thank you. Yeah, no, again, thank you for the question. Just by coincidence, I've purely just come from a DMT meeting where we've been reviewing risk as part of our cyclical processes. But I will say all of the place heads of service are involved in that process. It's always an active dialogue, and we have regular reports that come through from the individual management teams themselves. And then we'll also look at things like away days, for example, as well, where we'll be getting into the detail of some of the pressures we face. So from an assurance point of view, there is a cross-cutting approach taken, and certainly perhaps when one area is presenting a risk, you can see that then stimulates thought and discussion in other areas as well, because a number of the frontline services in place are dealing with specialist professional services, for example, where there is a scarcity on occasion of suitable resource. So there is very much a cross-cutting approach to what we do through the directorate, and again that's then fed up to and into discussions at CMT level, should those particular matters want to be escalated or need to be escalated. So so it's a comprehensive approach, really, very much from individual issues then through the management teams and corporately then as well. So hopefully that helps answer the question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Phil Sharman?
Chair, this is only a brief mention, but I know that agenda item 10 does have the climate change strategy. Chair, it'll depend whether we're going to progress that item in full within this session or not. But I think it would be helpful to have the director available, given it is part of the place responsibility, so that he could perhaps engage in a dialogue if that was to be taken today.
Okay. Perhaps you can hang around, Mark, until we get to that agenda item. There is something I need. There is something I need. Yeah, something I need to state when we come to that agenda item, for a decision to be made on what we're going to do with that report. So if you can hold that and hang around, that would be helpful. Are there any other questions? Similar point from me as Julie's made, really. Your Appendix 1 has got clear descriptions of your risks, but it's difficult from the report for us to understand how you're managing those risks. But I appreciate your comments that you've got PFMs and directorate management meetings, but from the point of view of the committee, it's difficult for us to see how that's working, particularly across individual services, and recognising the complexity of the directorate you've got, because it's a vast directorate, it's got its own pressures in every area of that business. So, it's a challenge, I'm sure, for you and for the whole of your structure in managing those risks. But there's one specific I want to pick up before I ask Simon to comment. I'm not quite sure what it's about. Is I notice in reports that are following, the agency costs for your directorate are significant. Up to July 22, there was 175 agency workers employed across your directorate. 145 of those are in parks and cleansing. And again, although this report has got a lot of information, we're not really getting a sense of how you're managing the risks of that additional expenditure, and how you're managing your staff resource and deployment of staff when you've got that level of agency engagement. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, Mark.
Yes, I will. Thank you, Chair, for that. And obviously we are acutely aware of the need to reduce the number of agency staff, corporately as well as within the directorate. What I would say, however, is that figure you quoted there is in excess of 3,000 staff that work within the place directorate at any one time. So it is relatively small, and it does allow us some flexibility to be able to deploy resources in particularly some of our frontline staff areas. So, you're right, it is subject of a later report, and I believe Chris Howell from Waste is going to join us to be able to speak to that particular point. So perhaps the committee might want to get some further detail from Chris there. But it is something we're aware of. It is something we monitor very, very closely. But I do think that it is something that does give us opportunity to ensure continuity of service for the public, really. So it's always a difficult balance to strike in regard to that.
I absolutely agree that continuity of the service to the public is a priority. So I'm not challenging that in any shape or form. I'm just looking at the additional cost of the 145, particularly in parks and cleansing only, and whether there's a need for a review of deployment of those staff to see staff can be used in different ways to avoid some of that agency costs. But I'm happy to expand on that discussion when it comes to the agenda item where 8 or 9, whichever one it may be. Simon, you've been waiting there. Did you want to add it to any of that discussion?
Yeah, thanks. So just a very brief comment from myself in terms of the corporate risks and some of the controls that Mark has mentioned about PFM and DMT, etc. As part of the planning process, I do compile the assurance map, which will sort of summarise some of these points as well. That forms part of the next planning report that comes to the committee. So there will be some further detail on those mitigated controls in tier 1, 2 and 3 that the members will see as part of that next report, just to highlight that there is some more detail coming to members on that in the next plan report.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mike White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to emphasise the need for the workforce within the place for the frontline services. Yes, these services are the day-to-day running of the council, which the public see mostly. Let's say waste management areas, street cleansing and things like that. The council got to ensure that these sections go out on promptly daily as per what the public expect. So it's important that we have got the money levels there, and I know it's very good to see as well that some of the people that we've had on the agency have been very committed to working along within council, and they are being given opportunities to gain full-time employment with us. But of course, within parks as well, parks actually carries out seasonal work, because some of the work that parks do clearly is seasonal. So to enhance the environments around the city, we bring in additional staff, agency staff, to work on those seasonal projects that the council puts in place. But as I say, it's essential that these services go out as they should do every day, because otherwise, as I say, I suppose if somebody from library services never turned up for one reason in the civic to the central library, I suppose nobody would know any different. But if we didn't have 2 or 3 refuse crews out on the road every day, I'm sure the public wouldn't be very happy, and they would certainly be making their voices heard. So as I say, it is an area where it's what the public expects of us.
I absolutely concur with that. Any other hands up? No?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Can I just make a comment following on? Thank you, Chair, and Mark. A comment following on from Councillor White with respect to sort of page 97, 329, about the waste collection vehicles. I mean, there were 3 choices at the end there, and the last one being insufficient vehicles being available. I think that's something that we really need to make sure that there are sufficient vehicles available, because waste collection, certainly in certain parts of the city, is a major concern for residents, and certainly in the ward where I am, I think we would end up with a riot rather than distaste. So it is a concern. Thank you.
Can I just say, Chair, I gather there's a system of a rolling programme of bringing in new vehicles. Is that correct, Mark?
It is, Councillor White. Yes, absolutely, and that's specifically what that risk is about. Is that programme of vehicle replacement and how we manage that. So yes, you're absolutely right. There is we have a central fleet management unit that deals with that. But it's obviously a costly business, however, because we have such a large fleet. So yeah, but very much so. You're absolutely right, Councillor, in relation to that particular issue.
Thank you for those questions, and thank you, Mark. But as I say, if you could hang around, Mark, because a couple of reports that there may be some questions further
Indeed.
on. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time, and just to recognise the work that is being done in your directorate. I mean, it is challenging in every area, so so the committee would recognise the work that is being done and the gratitude that we play to that as well. If we can move on then to the next agenda item, which is Social Services Absent Management Report. It's for information. I think Adrian Charge or David Howes is going to present this one.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I'm here to present the report, which is an update report, and Dave is here to support, and I'm sure we'll chip in and provide further information as we go through the report. Just a few things to highlight, really, in terms of the item 2 with regard to further progress. As at September 2022, subsequent to that report that was given at that time, the Oracle Fusion project is ongoing and due to be completed at the end of March of this year. But in terms of sickness absence generally across the council, it will allow real-time information for managers to support them in managing absence across all of the areas of the council. There's also additional provision as part of our learning programme for managers to undertake the mandatory sickness absence training, and that Oracle function will give better ability on reporting on completion of that mandatory training for managers with regard to sickness absence. Also, in terms of the appointment of the Management of Absence Advisor, and we have a member of my team who's dedicated to support social services managers in managing absence. We're receiving excellent feedback on the work that she's undertaking, particularly with regard to reducing the number of long-term sickness cases by approximately 25% in the last year, and ensuring that sickness breaches are being adhered to, providing additional training to managers, and working with occupational health, particularly with regard to support and training in managing stress and supporting managers in managing stress within their teams. With regard to sickness levels, you can see there's a lot of detail with regard under section 3 with regard to the levels of sickness in the areas across social services. It is recognised that it is highest in front-facing areas such as residential and domiciliary care. And in comparison to last year, the number of COVID-related cases have reduced, but it's not gone away. As I'm sure we all appreciate, COVID has not gone away. But there has been increased instances of staff with chest and flu infections, again in frontline roles. In terms of proactive support to support managers and staff, we have a staff recognition scheme in place within social services and a wellbeing strategy, and staff are surveyed to ensure that any particular workforce issues are identified and addressed, and there's flexible working provisions as well to support staff with regard to their shall we say employment position and their ability to work flexibly within the social services team. So that's a really sort of quick summary of that particular report. David, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. A couple of comments, if I may, Chair. I suppose there's two separate issues for us, isn't there? I imagine that Audit Committee be particularly concerned if there was evidence of non-compliance with our processes. So that's one element of the, I suppose, the reporting and the assurance. The extra resource that Adrian referred to, that does have a twin focus. There has been a focus on making sure particularly in very busy, challenged circumstances where managers are getting pulled from pillar to post just to manage, effectively the crisis situation that we've been in, that we didn't want to, I suppose, go backwards on basic compliance with following the rules of the council. I'm sure there were examples where certainly during the most difficult periods, there were examples of that. So part of the focus of that dedicated resource is to make sure that we don't go backwards, and where we need to make sure we're improving. And so, for example, they were targeting the areas where that Adrian's already referenced, that where we had potentially the most challenges, so the highest levels of sickness absence, under most level of pressure as a result of things like COVID. So those frontline domiciliary care, residential care, etc. Those types of services. And as Adrian said, we've had really good feedback on the impact that has made. So I'm really grateful for the partnership work that colleagues in HR have been doing with us about that. And then there's the other element of the actual, irrespective of levels of compliance with the basic processes, we've clearly got significant challenges in those areas. But whilst it might not be immediately obvious, because the description in the tables are a bit in code. So when it talks about integrated care services, which is a very high level description of services, I can confirm in the three big areas where there are highest levels of sickness absence, they are absolutely, as Adrian has described, they are those areas of frontline domiciliary care, residential care, and some other frontline areas. And those are the areas where you would expect to see higher levels of sickness absence in usual times, but also particularly at the moment, because the reality is, if you were exposed to COVID any period, any time during the past 3 years, and still now, that you have to be off work, you cannot be going in to provide care for vulnerable individuals, and clearly the nature of those roles makes it difficult for there to be very obvious alternatives that you could be doing, virtually or from home. So it's a very different matter for me to catch COVID, and as long as I'm not desperately sick, well, I can still work virtually. But for those frontline staff, clearly they can't. Adrian's always referenced as well, as expected, as COVID went down and we came out of lockdown, what we've seen is increasing numbers of people with other respiratory illnesses, as flu, etc., has taken hold, again in sight. And again, for those, members of staff caring for very vulnerable individuals, not an option to say that's fine, just struggle through, come in coughing and spluttering all over people who, potentially be at risk of dying as a result of us passing on, those sorts of, infections. So again, it's remained, very challenging, period for us. But necessarily so, every effort is being made, both to support staff to be well and in work. So that's things like promotion of vaccine uptake and all those other usual things, being mindful of, certainly when there were more formalised restrictions in place, to make sure staff were adhering to them. And still now we have increased and enhanced infection control procedures in place, for the staff to try and bear down on those very obvious things. And the other comment I wanted to make, there is a connection as well. You will see, high levels of reported sickness absence linked to stress. Well, it all connects. The reality is our staff have been, have done extraordinary things over the past 3 years, along with all of their other colleagues across, health and care services, third sector colleagues, etc. But that has taken its toll, and it continues to take its toll, and continues to be compounded by, well, if you've got high levels of sickness absence as a result of, things like COVID, respiratory illnesses, etc., as well as the usual, sickness absence, long-term, chronic illnesses, etc., that puts an added burden on staff who are well and in work. And then you can easily imagine, I think, just from a common sense perspective, of it's a really challenging set of circumstances for us to be trying to manage. But I am confident, hopefully the committee gets some confidence, but I'm sure you'll have questions, that every effort is being made to manage that, and the investment in staff wellbeing approaches, alongside the you know, the compliance of rules, etc., and the additional investment we've made in that, as well as the work we're doing to try and remodel services, that every effort is being made to try and tackle what is difficult circumstances and will continue to be difficult circumstances going forward. I think I said final point, but I have one more point to make, Chair, if you'll indulge me. If I compare and contrast the challenges that in these areas that we're finding within the council, and then look at, you know, comparator type services, whether it's in other local authorities or particularly what you know, what's more easily apparent to me and is reported to me regularly, is that in our equivalent or sometimes integrated health services, the levels of staff absence, the reasons, the attempts that we're making to manage them, you know, those same issues, it's a very similar picture, and in some areas is you know, a greater challenge and a worse challenge than the circumstances that the council are trying to manage as best we can in those frontline services. And of course that has a knock-on impact for us as well. If individuals are struggling to access health services because of absences of staff, etc., that you know, and other challenges, well, that, you know, often those circumstances default to us as often a provider of last resort, and that compounds the challenges that then play through in some of the pressures that you can see evident from this report. So that was a bit of a soapbox oratory, but I'll stop there, Chair.
Thank you very much, Dave. I mean, you're quite right. I mean, the Governance and Audit Committee need to be assured that there's compliance with the HR policies and rules and regs. But equally as important is that for those staff that are suffering from stress and other ailments, have got the necessary support that they need. And I'm particularly pleased to see that there's been some attention given to some support around HR and occupational health to give that support to those particularly suffering with stress, because that's clearly the biggest issue on the league tables at the top of page 104. But I think we must recognise that staff support is critical to ensure that our workforce is fit and healthy. Have we any questions from anyone on this paper? No. Yeah.
Yes, Dave, thanks for that. I'm sure everybody appreciates, you know, the hard work the staff in social services and other parts of the council have actually carried out, and COVID certainly hasn't helped and so on. And it is, I think, a bit of a vicious circle where somebody goes off, you know, with sickness, whether it's stress or whatever, somebody else has got to pick up the tab. But we actually spoke earlier in place about agency workers, and I know they're actually stretched, if I can say, the private sector at the moment. Do they actually play a part in actually assisting us, if I can call it that, at the present time?
Yeah, I mean, it's picked up in your later paper around agency workers. I think must be careful not to conflate agency workers with commissioned providers of social care that operate either in the third sector or the independent sector. First of all, those providers have been experiencing, you know, the same challenges that we have, but actually works the other way round. I think you're probably either in this committee or possibly some of the members might have heard me talk about this in scrutiny sessions around, particularly during the winter period. The arrangements that we've had in place over the past couple of years is to agree effectively to create emergency support arrangements in the council to support those providers where they were at risk of you know, not being able to support the individuals that they were supposed to be supporting, and in worst case scenario, I've talked about, you know, risks of you know, a care home failure or something like that. So actually the added pressure that we've been trying to manage, you know, on top of all of the demands for those people that the council are directly supporting, is to make sure that we're in a position to actually step in and support those providers in the independent sector as well. That adds to compounding the amount of pressure that we've then had within the council, and and again plays out, I'm sure, in aspects of that in staff pressures and increased stress levels, etc. But the reality is it has been a needs must situation, and inevitably, as I said earlier, the council becomes the provider of last resort, where everything else is at risk of falling over. We must find a way of stepping in, and that's meant that we've had to make incredible calls on our staff, and they have been extraordinary in stepping up to those challenges. I suppose I'm anticipating and very much hoping that some of those pressures will ease in the coming year, and that probably does link to the levels of recourse to agency staff and the reasons for proper agency staff. So this is different from third sector providers or independent providers, where actually we have to go to an agency to say, for whatever reason, and usually it is we have a sudden absence or a gap suddenly in a rota in a care home, or we don't have enough staff to cover a domiciliary care run. There are clearly many occasions, or have been many occasions, where we've had to then go to an independent agency and say, have you got staff that can step in and support us? And that increases as we've run up to towards the winter period. And I think you could probably see within that later report that it has got worse during this more, I say worse, there's been more recourse to those what are described as individual assignments. They're not unique people. It's not that there's thousands of agency workers that are suddenly stepping in. It's that there are very many hundreds of occasions during the year where we do need to pull on that additional resource, because our both the combination of our establishment cohort plus our own internal agency. So we do have an internal agency that wouldn't, that would be our first port of call to not go to independent agency workers. But when we don't have capacity, and we're having to meet all of these competing demands, then we have had to go out to independent agencies if they have got staff, and then draw on those staff. But our plan, and I remain optimistic that level of recourse to those independent agencies will decrease in this coming year as things stabilise within both our own arrangements and those arrangements in the independent and third sector. But that might be wishful thinking on my part, and we might be here in 6 months' time saying, "Oh, we're not quite seeing it play out in that way." We're a bit of a hostage to fortune for the time being. Sorry, I'll stop there, Chief.
Okay, thank you, David. Okay, Jack. Julie Davis.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Adrian and David for your presentations. I think we all appreciate the support that's been given to staff in terms of compliance with processes, but no comparators have been given in the report for us to get a view as to whether that support has helped reduce absence management. So I'm wondering, perhaps going forward, now that we're living with COVID, whether comparators could be included in the report to give us a feel of whether absence is reducing or not. And I have another couple of questions, if you don't mind. Are you reviewing the root causes of stress to try and minimise the risk of recurrence? And what support is available to staff when they return to work? Thank you.
Adrian, do you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so on the first point, yes, I'm sure we can provide those comparators. Just as I mentioned in the report earlier, an indicator of the success of the Management of Absence Advisor post, it has been to reduce the numbers of long-term sickness by approximately 25% across the two main service areas, but certainly can provide a lot more detail behind that. I guess the issue here is as well is that you know, there will be challenges as we've mentioned, in that you know, the types of sickness will have changed from primarily COVID to primarily, you know, chest and flu infections. You know, obviously we've identified that stress is a key activity there as well. So, you know, the success of this role has also been in sort of in identifying areas where we can be more proactive and should be more proactive in supporting our staff, and notwithstanding that the work of Dave's team and Deborah as a workforce lead in introducing measures that will avoid sickness hopefully happening in the future, is around things like the wellbeing strategy that's been introduced, the surveying of staff to identify areas where you know, we can address ahead of any particular issue. So yes, so short answer to your question, Julie, is yes, I'm sure we can provide that further information for you.
Thank you, Adrian.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing any hands up in the room. So if I can thank you both, Adrian and you, Dave, for attending to present this paper. And if we can move on to agenda item 9 next, which is Adrian, again, you and Chris Howell, I understand.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and I'm sure Dave will have a view from social services as well. I'm just going to bring Chris into the call, if that's okay.
Chris.
Is Chris here? I can't see. Ah, yes, it's calling. Yes, I think Chris is in now. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chris. Okay, so the purpose of this report, Chair, is to again provide an update on the employment of agency staff following previous reports that have come through to the Audit Committee, particularly around the details of agency workers employed for more than 12 months. And section 2 of the report provides detail as to what has happened in managing those long-term agency workers. You can see that in social services, there were 4 that were identified as having worked for the council for more than 12 months, 2 in residential care and 2 in child and family services. And in terms of those in adult services, those are secured flexible contracts. But recognising that the use of agency workers in those areas is sporadic. It's not a continual contract for agency workers in that area. The other 2 workers in child and family were both offered permanent employment, but decided not to accept permanent employment, and their contracts will be finishing at the end of March this year. In place, you'll see in section 2.2 that there are long-term agency workers, or were long-term agency workers in building services. Those were covering long-term sickness, but are now working elsewhere in the council, or are no longer with the authority. In library services, there is a long-term agency worker there that is utilised again sporadically, but as a last resort to cover sickness absence in that particular area. There's 1 longer-term agency worker in city centre management team, and we are hoping to make that role permanent, and a business case has been submitted for that to take place. And in highways and transportation, the 3 agency workers that are employed there are in specific skill set areas used on a project basis. They have been offered the opportunity to be appointed into a permanent role, but all have declined that particular offer. And then there are details with regard to waste, parks and cleansing, which I'm sure Chris will be able to expand on, with regard to, you know, the application of agency workers in that particular area. I think on the last presentation we touched on sickness absence areas in social services. So I'm not sure if there will be any specific questions around that. But again, in place, there's details there under section 4 with regard to agency worker figures in waste parks and cleansing. Chris, is there anything you want to come in on that point in respect of waste parks and cleansing?
I suppose just to give the narrative around where we've come from and where we're heading. In terms of the section 4 there, the agency staff who've been with us more than 12 months. In parks and cleansing, the 8.5 there, placements will be ending end of this financial year. They were to do particular project work which has set funding. And then the collections and operations are both in the waste area. And what we've done in waste over the last probably 4 or 5 years, we've taken on upwards of 70 staff through traineeships, which gives our staff a qualification and gives them a wider base for learning and have a wider skill set for undertaking their roles. We currently have 30 trainees on board, which started in September. Their traineeship will finish in June, and then the intention then is to, while some of the 20 people there are undertaking roles which are still considered temporary in nature or on a trial basis, there are certainly enough there to run another traineeship next year for another 10 trainees. So that's our intention, is to look to continually employ, but through traineeships.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions then on this? So Paxton, Councillor Paxton Wood-Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's a question really in the sense that these figures that you've given us at this stage are only up to July 22, as opposed to being fairly current, I suppose. And the Director of Social Services know full well that in our last Child and Family Services Scrutiny Performance Panel meeting, we expressed concern because we saw that the number of agency staff had increased up to about 44. And really one of the things that concerns us particularly was that when we went into special measures in 2009, one of the main factors that contributed to that was a very high level of agency workers, and not of necessity who were all British. In fact, we were bringing them in from abroad as well. Obviously, we haven't got to that stage, but we did see it as a potential concern and something that we need to keep a very close eye on in that sense, and we will do that in terms of Child and Family Services. Obviously, that's because you're looking to fill vacancies, and I know the work that's been going on there with the academy and things of that nature, which will hopefully bear fruit in the future. But are there any problems in terms of recruitment and in terms of the speed of recruitment and getting staff in at this stage? Because it is quite a serious matter as far as we're concerned in terms of the department going forward, and be interested to hear what you've got to say on that. Thank you, Chair. Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Who's best to respond to that? Is it Dave or is it Adrian?
I think what I could say from the discussions I've had with Deborah, who's the Workforce Lead in Social Services, is that there is a lot of effort being undertaken to address the recruitment and resourcing issues that impact social services. Not just for Swansea Council, I have to say, but other authorities and organisations in that particular sector. We are working closely with our regional colleagues and undertaking recruitment exercises and publicity exercises with a view to addressing that particular issue. And in actual fact, just catching up on my notes here, that that there are plans in place to bring in support assistance to support in the social services, the social worker sector. So there are a whole range of activities that have been undertaken to try and support the recruitment of suitably qualified and motivated staff in that particular area. But it's a challenge that's impacting on us as well as others.
Dave, do you want to come in? But can you be short and sweet on it, because we're running short of time now.
I'll do my best, Chair. Now, I mean, Councillor Hood-Williams is aware from our discussions in scrutiny is quite right. There is a specific area of concern. So leaving aside the big numbers of individual assignments, predominantly in adult frontline social care, which isn't the same sort of concern that Councillor Hood-Williams is describing. There is a particular concern about qualified social work capacity across Wales and across the UK. And that is leading us to have again, a reliance on employing agency social workers, which we pretty much eradicated, 4 or 5 years ago. I'm imagining that will still be the case for the coming year. And I would have thought the numbers, with the current plans will be around 10 to 20 social workers maximum at any given time. I think is the number that we can probably assume that we may well be relying on, and but it is particularly going to be frontline children's services. That's not ideal. It's not as high a level of dependence as some other local authorities who are at much higher levels. If it started to rise above that sort of number, then I think we really would be concerned that the strategies that are in place aren't working. But as Councillor Hood-Williams has said, there's a very close focus on that in the scrutiny session. So we'll keep returning to it, no doubt, in the coming year.
Thank you, Dave. Paxton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, David. Obviously, the conversations we've had anyway, but it is a concern, certainly, and there was a concern that possibly that we wanted to make sure that there were no hindrance in the recruitment process from people applying to getting appointed as well, to make sure that those vacancies are filled as quickly as possible to avoid the need for agency staff.
Thank you, Councillor Hood-Williams. For the purposes, can the meetings record that concern and the action that's been taken to mitigate that level of risk as well, please? Phil Sharman.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm also concerned about numbers. I just want to underline some of the issues that Councillor Paxton has raised there. I don't want the committee to be under a false sense of security, because, as you quite rightly pointed out, we've only got 5 months expenditure in that table in this year at 2.2 million. If that trend continues, and I realise there could be winter pressures that could increase the level of agency in those later months, that gives a year-end projection on those numbers at 5.3 million, just assuming that plays out for the year, and we compare that to 5.9 million for the previous year. So that's something absolutely that management need to keep a watch on. But Chair, if I could just pick up a related point then, if we're looking at expenditure in the order of 5 million plus, then are we confident that that is being undertaken in accordance with procurement regulations, and there are proper contracts in place that have gone through due process to let some of these big numbers to the various agencies? There's a passing mention of this in paragraph 5.4, which looks like it's going to be tightening up going forward from the 1st of April 23. But these current contracts in play, can we just have some assurance about the regularity of that procurement spend? Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Is this one for you, Adrian? You're on mute, Adrian.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, certainly I can provide updated figures with regard to agency spend. It was too late, I'm afraid, to include in this report, but I will forward that on to the committee, and happy to share that information. Yeah, in terms of my role in sort of ensuring the governance of the agency worker policy, yeah, and I think this referenced in the report that there is that governance that takes place with the relevant managers who are hiring agency workers. I can take up your concerns with regard to our procurement function, with regard to the procurement activity, but certainly I'm sure from previous discussions, the appropriate governance arrangements are in place.
Thank you, Adrian. Councillor Leslie Walton.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just going back to the numbers increasing, personally, I'm not remotely surprised that you're having to use more agency staff in social services. I mean, I can't imagine what challenges our staff have had to be put through, particularly during COVID. So I sympathise and understand how the figures are increased. The only thing I would perhaps say is it might be useful to know perhaps some more up-to-date figures to see what the trend has been over the last 8 months, because as somebody's already, Paxton's already mentioned, the figures we've got are only back in July. So it might put a slightly different slant to the picture. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Walton. Adrian, you mentioned that you'd had the figures, but you weren't able to present them. Do you have them to hand so you could articulate them at this meeting?
Yeah, I haven't got the numbers of actual agency workers, but in terms of the total spend, just to let you know that in August of 22, the total spend was just over 610,000. That increased to 794,000 in September, 557,000 in October, increased to just short of 707,000 in November, and 611,000 in December.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. So Phil, your projection is not far off track then?
I'd say my projection is an underestimate based upon those month by month figures. So it would be helpful for this committee to receive an update, I think, in writing. And the level of the overall spending is something which I'm sure will be of concern not only to committee but also to finance director, just to kind of see how that can be managed through to the year end.
I think the committee raised concern about this now for some months, if not over a year now, and we're not really seeing any improvement in the level of agency. I recognise the pressures that we've gone through COVID, but we're post-COVID now, and I would have hoped to have seen some kind of a reduction, but based on those figures, I'm not quite sure we are. I'm assured you're saying we've got compliance with HR policies, but there's clearly something that we need to do more on. But if we can have that written information through to the meeting, I mean, I'm happy if it's included in just a briefing paper rather than a full report as part of the tracker actions, to save you having to attend again, Adrian. I'm minded not to put too much pressure on officers at this moment in time. So if you can provide Jeremy with that level of detail on numbers and costs, and if you've got an idea of projection to the end of March, that would be helpful.
Yes.
And then we can add that to the tracker report rather than you having to reappear at the committee. I've just got Councillor Leslie Walton and then Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yeah, I just want to say again, I think we've got to be very careful at this point to think, oh, it's all getting better, it's going to ease off and all the rest of it. I think one of the unseen consequences of COVID has been the effect on people's mental health. And I'll be one of the first to say, I know it's affected my mental health. And I'm not a frontline worker. So God knows what it's done to some of the people who are dealing with difficult family circumstances at the best of times and have now probably had those situations exacerbated beyond belief because of COVID. So I don't think this is going to go away fast. And I think we'd be very foolish to think that that department is going to suddenly be able to go back and make use of the staff it's got. I'm guessing it probably hasn't even got enough staff at the moment, and there's not enough people out there willing to come in and take the vacancies. So I think we've got to be careful and be very aware of what's really going on.
Thank you, Councillor Walton. Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yes, I agree with Councillor Walton. I think a lot of areas are understaffed anyway at the present time. But I think when we're talking about costings and we're talking about agency workers, agency do provide us with a service. If there were no agency workers, we'd been in quite a mess. But I always think really that the difference in cost between the staff we actually pay and the amount we actually pay agency workers, it would have cost us, and I know it cost us in sick pay anyway, X amount to employ those people. On the difference really between that cost and the cost we pay agency workers, I'd love to see that really at the end of the day, to see what sort of difference it is actually costing us.
Thank you. Okay, then I've not seen any more questions or hands up. So thank you, Adrian and Chris. And if you can ensure that Jeremy gets that summary paper, so we've got it to see at the next meeting through the tracker report, that would be helpful. But I acknowledge the comments that have been made today. It's not an easy area to cover, but I think agency costs are known to be significantly more than, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you all for that. Challenging area, but as you say, it's important that we get the services provided in the right and proper way to the residents of Swansea. If we can move on then, the next item is agenda item 10. If I can just advise the committee, there are no officers to present this report. I did ask for Audit Wales representation at the meeting, and I think there are a couple of colleagues from Audit Wales here. Yeah.
Well,
yeah. Duncan and oh, Non, you're here as well, is that? Welcome, Non. The reason I asked for you to attend in case there were any questions that needed to be asked today, but I'd like to advise the committee members that this report went on the 10th of January to the Scrutiny Performance Panel for Climate Change and Nature. That meeting was chaired by Councillor Hannah Lawson, and Councillor Andrea Lewis also attended that meeting, along with officers Jeff Bacon and Rachel Lewis. So this has been through scrutiny on the 10th. I've asked to see the minutes of that meeting to see the level of scrutiny that was applied to this paper. And I was going to suggest that once we've seen the level of scrutiny through the minutes, is that we decide at what point we'd like to receive an update on this report. Now, because it's on the agenda, I'm minded not to be criticised, so I'd like to take a vote on that, Jeremy, to make sure that all the members are happy to defer it until we've got a handle on, because I give assurance to the leader and the chief exec that this committee will not duplicate any of the work of the scrutiny committees in whichever guise they work. But we'd look for assurance from those scrutiny committees. So to make sure that everybody's in agreement for that, I would like to take a vote that we can defer it. But I'd also invite Non or Duncan to give the committee assurance in the interim that the response that they've received from the council, which is at item 10D, they are satisfied with at this moment in time. So if we can take the first question first and cast that vote that everyone is content for it to be deferred for the reasons that I've said. Can you start in the room?
Okay, I'll call the names out. Gordon Anderson.
Gordon?
Yeah, yes, in agreement.
4. Okay. Julie Davis.
4.
Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams.
4.
Councillor Alan Jeffrey.
Yes, 4.
Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yeah, 4.
Councillor Michael Locke.
4.
Chair.
4.
Councillor Sam Pritchard.
4.
Phil Sharman.
4.
Councillor Leslie Walton.
4.
And Councillor Mike White.
4.
Okay, thank you, Chair. That's unanimous.
Thank you. So we'll take that for an update at a future meeting once we've got a firm handle on what the scrutiny panel have done and continue to do. But Non, can you give the committee assurance that you've had the cooperation from officers to respond to this report and you're content with the work that's been done to date? That will give us a level of assurance at this moment in time until it comes back to us.
Thanks very much for the opportunity to answer, even though it's been deferred. And hopefully that gives you a flavour. As you say, taking assurance from others and having that corporate oversight as to what is happening as a result of our reports is key for any governance and audit committee. Happy to come back, obviously, but as you say, your main focus is what the council is now doing as a result of our reports that are on the agenda today, but deferred. In terms of giving assurance to yourselves in terms of the cooperation of officers, obviously officers and us have a good working relationship and have cooperated well on this. What I can't give you assurance on is on the response, because we haven't done any work like you in that sense on that response yet. We will be following up, as you would expect, all of our recommendations over the coming years and keeping an eye on how you as a council and you as Governance and Audit Committee will be tracking through progress on actions, including on these. And that relates not just to the local recommendation that we made in terms of a costed plan, which we can see that the council has got a costed plan. How that is integrated into your medium-term financial plan is yet to be understood, but looking to yourselves as Governance and Audit Committee to see how that is looked at going forward. So I can't give you assurance to the second one because we haven't done the work yet.
Thank you, Non. We've agreed to defer it, so if I can ask that if you do have any questions, then we pick those up when it comes back, or if there's anything that's really causing committee concerns, if they can speak to me outside of the meeting, and then we can see which way we can take that forward. Thank you, Non, and thank you, Duncan, for popping in to see us today. We do welcome your attendance at this meeting, and just want to say thank you for that. So if we can move on in that instance then to agenda item 11, which is the tracker report. This is a report that we have routinely. And are there any questions on this report? Councillor Bolton.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I notice that the training that was going to be on the 28th has now been pushed back to immediately before our next meeting. Now, my concern is that training is going to be very much relevant to that meeting. I'm wondering, is there any chance that we could have the information for that training, even though we're going to have the training as well, beforehand, so we can have a bit more notice as to what implications that we might need in actually having at the actual meeting?
Thank you, Councillor Walton. You're quite right. It has been pushed back at the request of Ben Smith, and I'm sure Ben will be able to share the information that he's going to go through with us beforehand. I absolutely support what you've asked for, and we can perhaps, Jeremy, you can alert Ben to circulating that information so we can consider the detail in that training session before the session starts, you know, with the complexities and the you know the work that we need to do. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Chair.
If I can turn to Appendix 1 of the tracker report, we discussed at the meeting in December the annual review of performance, and we made a number of recommendations to ask Richard to make some changes prior to that report going to the full council. I just want to ask Richard if he could provide us with an update before it goes back to council. I don't particularly want the full report, but I would just like assurance that all those actions have been taken and the report is now reflective of the comments raised by the Governance and Audit Committee. Is that okay, Richard?
Yes, Chair. In the report that's gone forward to Council, I have provided in that report a brief update in relation to each of the points, some of which were addressed in this particular report and some of which will be addressed in the next report.
Thank you, Richard. The other item I wanted to pick up is Action 62, which is November meeting. We discussed the Audit Committee work plan, and we also discussed the possibility of using the SIPFA questionnaire to look at the committee's effectiveness. The narrative in that right-hand box is not quite correct, and the position currently stands is that SIPFA questionnaire will be used for us to complete, and Simon and Ben are going to look to see whether Audit Wales will be able to support the correlation of the results of that questionnaire or whether it will be done by other means. So that's going to come to a future meeting very soon. But in the meanwhile, we will all likely to receive a questionnaire for completion, for resubmission, to see if there are any different approaches we need to make, or if there are any gaps in what we've been doing up to date for the end of our annual report. Simon, do you want to comment?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just a bit of an update on this one. I've been speaking to Ben this morning. It looks as if we're going to get CMT support to coordinate distribution of the questionnaire imminently. I've been in touch with Tracy Buwen this morning, so it would be coming from Tracy, ideally. And then once that's been distributed, we'll collate the response. I'm not sure how we're going to collate them, whether they're going to go back to Tracy to collate, but you should be receiving those questionnaires quite shortly, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments on that tracker report? I mean, there are some outstanding actions, but they've all got dates when we're expecting that information to come back through. If there are no further questions on that, if we can move to agenda item 12, and that's the Audit Committee work plan and the terms of references on as an appendix there. I've got no questions on that unless anyone's got questions. It's something that's there at every meeting, so we can ensure that we're covering all the business that we need to cover and we'll be able to satisfy our terms of reference. So I'm not seeing any hands up on that one either. So if we can bring the meeting to a close, dead on time. Can I thank everyone once again for attending today and for those attending remotely, for your participation, the questions and your absolute engagement. I do appreciate that at every meeting. Thank you very much. Right.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.